All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 365. UN Women wants men to STFU. And of course, that's the university that feminists recommend to men's rights activists all the time, right? Oh no, just go attend STFU. You'll be fine. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson. And we have the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, working in the background to make sure I don't fuck anything up tonight. Well, at least not with regard to the technical difficulties. Tonight we're stepping away from the National Organization for Women to an international women's organization that is every bit as toxic. And I know a lot of people say, well, they don't actually have an association with the United Nations. They don't have any influence. They don't have... Yes, they do. They have influence. They make recommendations, and they have the pull of gynocentrism. They have the pull of feminist jurisprudence in legislative actions and in the history of feminist influence on law and policy in every country that's part of the United Nations. And then on top of that, they have influence over journalists. So the UN Women sort of gives out the marching orders, and journalists in multiple countries will then turn around and just, without questioning what they've said, report the same. Like, they'll go along with whatever they've said and make the same claims. They'll cite them as a source, even if it's an editorial like this, which this really is an editorial. It's not a stretch to say that large parts of it are made up whole cloth. But you'll see in the future, because this was actually an article from May that I just happened to locate, and then there's another article on how to counter us. But you'll see in other areas, you'll see references to these articles, or just to the UN Women organization making these statements, as if by citing the UN Women organization as a reference for these statements, it provides credibility for claims based on these statements. So that's basically how feminists have influenced. This is true because we said so. And by the way, other people are going to say this is true because we said so. And when they say this is true because we said so, then we can cite their reference to us as evidence that this is true because they said it's true because we said so. And that's their whole MO for credibility, obtaining credibility. They don't actually have any reality there. They don't actually have any credibility. They didn't research this and then turn around and say, well, here's our information. This is what we can prove, right? And I guarantee you're going to notice that there are some names missing from who are they talking about? Who are they referring to when they talk about the men's rights movement? You're going to notice, if you know the men's rights movement and you are familiar with our history and the things that have been done by the men's rights movement, the advocacy that we've engaged in, the people who have spoken to the media, the individuals who have publications that they've maintained for years and years, and then you see who they talk about it's going to be kind of shocking to you in some ways. Like, why are they referring to these people and not the actual men's rights movement? And we'll get into the reason why they might do that here shortly. But in the meantime, let's get started with this article here. So before I actually say anything about the article, I have to bitch about this, okay? Because I've been in publishing before. I worked for a couple of different publications, mostly academically, but I worked for a public newspaper, right? And every so often we had artwork instead of like photographs are considered art as well, but it's a different type, right? We had people's drawings, we had line drawings, we had other types of like computer generated drawings and stuff like that. A lot of clip art was used. We used advertising art. So I kind of know that whoever published this, I mean, we have better stuff in articles in the Honey Badger Brigade blog, right? They have access to better shit than this. This is the laziest thing I have seen. One of the laziest things I've seen in regard to the artwork that feminists put on their articles, on their websites and everything. They do this all the time too. It drives me nuts because you're trying to attract a reader and you're trying to attract a certain type of reader to your publication. And if you want, a certain level of intellect, you at least want to have decent artwork. And this is the kind of thing that it looks clever the first time it's done. It's supposed to mimic cutting out shapes and creating images of people and things from those shapes, like foam shapes and paper shapes, like construction paper shapes and stuff like that. But this is absolute shit. And I think it's designed to attract a dumber class of reader, which is why it took me a couple of months to even see this article. It just didn't come across my feed, or if it did, I didn't notice it. But in any case,
there are no lines. In case anyone's wondering what it is with this corporate style of cartoons, it's that there's no lines. I mean, how much do I have to spoon feed it to you all? Lines equal borders.
Yep.
I hope I'm
Boundaries.
I hope I'm not going too Candace Owens there into the deep conspiracy theory dive. But yeah.
Oop, did we lose you, Mike?
Yeah. No,
there we go.
It's that there's no lines.
Yeah, and that's a major thing with feminists. Like, they will talk about things like bodily autonomy, right? And they'll talk about things like freedom of choice. But then if you establish boundaries at your end, if you suggest that boundaries should exist for men, right? Or for a division between women and taxpayers, where women don't just own the entire body of taxes that's created annually, that's confiscated from citizens annually, that then all of a sudden you're selfish and mean and rotten and you hate women. Right? Frosted glass, there you go. That's it. Political cartoons are more subtle. This image was made for children. And this was made to dictate a perspective. This is how you should see the men's rights movement. That's what this image tells people when they see it. Oh, and I forgot. We had a super chat last week that I have not read because it didn't come through till like half an hour after the show, and I can't find it. I'll have to look it up when I'm going through the super chats later. But in any case, so here's what they have to actually say. With more than 5.5 billion people online, so much for dead internet theory, as many and nearly as many on social media, digital spaces have become central to how we learn and connect. But alongside its boundaries or its benefits, the internet is also used to being used to spread hate, abuse, and misogyny. One growing corner. Notice they provided a characterization for you there, right? They didn't give you the opportunity to make your own decision about what you think in regard to who the men's rights movement is and what characterization you might make of our advocacy, the things that we have said in regard to law and policy discriminating against men, in regard to fathers' rights, any of that. Nope, not a word. Just the internet is also being used to spread hate, abuse, and misogyny. That's called poisoning the well. Now, everything else that comes out of that well is going to be tainted with that. Here's the perspective you're supposed to have when you read this article. Poison. One growing corner of the digital world is the, quote, manosphere, end quote. A loose network of communities that claim to address men's struggles. Dating, fitness, or fatherhood, for example, but often promote harmful advice and attitudes. So they gave a definition, right? If you give a definition of feminism other than the dictionary definition, they point to the dictionary definition and have a hissy fit. How dare you talk about what feminism does? Here's a dictionary definition. We don't accept what you said because it doesn't match the dictionary definition. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if feminists actually tried to make it legal for women to molest children, which in some countries, that's not too far from the truth, right? Because there have been feminists in some countries that have directly opposed laws labeling it rape when a woman forces herself on an unwilling male victim. And so if it can't be that particular crime, it is kind of hinky. Feminists object to that, right? And in some instances, that has meant that there is no law penalizing any type of predatory sexual violence against a male victim perpetrated by a female perpetrator, whether the victim is over or underage. But in other instances, it just means that when a woman does it, she gets charged with something less instead of the greater crime of rape. So there are instances where we could say, well, feminism is a loose network of communities that advocates for discrimination against men in law and policy, and also supports female predators. And we wouldn't be too far off describing it that way, right? But if we do that, if we write about them like that, they point to a dictionary definition. Well, they can't do that. They can't say that. That's not the dictionary definition, right? So here we are. We get defined by UN women without any description of what we do, who we talk to, how we talk to them, what law and policy we've advocated for. They didn't make any reference here to say any of the successes that the National Coalition for Men has had in litigation and also in legislative lobbying. None of that. None of the fathers' rights groups that have gotten equally shared parenting laws passed in the United States. Doesn't exist, right? It's all just communities that claim to address men's struggles, but often promote harmful advice and attitudes. As a United Nations Secretary General's report on violence against women and girls highlights, so now they're associating it with violence against women and girls, right? These groups are united by an opposition to feminism and misrepresent men as victims of the current social and political climate. When you think about that whole paragraph, right? This is an entire paragraph of poisoning the well. Gish Gallop. So we've been classified, just in this one paragraph, we've been classified basically as liars, as bad advisors, and as do-nothings, because all we do is provide advice, according to this. And then also, they're classifying men's experiences as not the same, not of the same nature, when men experience the same things that women do, as women's experiences are when women experience it. Right? So where men are abused, like by their partners, feminists don't want to talk about that unless, it's in the context of a gay relationship. Then they want to talk about it, but they don't want to talk about it when it's a straight marriage and the woman is doing things like pouring boiling water on her husband while he is sleeping, right? Or when the woman attempts to stab him with a knife, breaks her wrist trying to get through the arm that he put up to defend himself, and then tells the police he beat her and gets him locked up overnight because the injury looks to the police like he hurt her, which did happen in California. Nope, they only want to talk about it's not valid that, the idea that it's not valid that men are victims of the system that discriminates when a man is the victim of abuse. Right? They want to say men are not victims of a system that prevents them from raising their own children. They want to say men are not victims of a system that allows women to rape them and then extort them for money through the child support system, because they're not, they don't get out of child support by not consenting to the conception or the action that conceived the child. Like, not a word about the fact that a rapist shouldn't have custody of a child that is conceived by the rape. Like, certainly, if a male perpetrator were to obtain custody of the child of a female victim of rape, feminists would be up in arms, marching in the street. How dare this happen, right? But they're perfectly comfortable with women who rape boys, who are definitely pedophiles because they have raped boys, raising a child. And then also extorting an underage boy who cannot get a job because he is too young. Like, the youngest that I've seen was 11. That there was a case where an 11-year-old was told that his inability to legally have a job didn't get him out of being obligated to pay child support to his rapist. Carly Ellison, who is masquerading as Chris Mizumo, you said the same things as Carly Ellison too many times. Just want to point out that when two men, both, or two boys or two men, or a man and a boy, have any kind of sexual conduct, there's not a child conceived from that. Not two men consensually, not two men non-consensually, not anything involving boys. No child is conceived by that, right? It only happens when a woman is involved. And so every male victim of rape who is forced to pay child support, the perpetrator was a woman, not a man. So you can quit with that shit. Going on. there's their characterization. All of those issues, they've just declared them illegitimate by claiming it a misrepresentation, calling it a misrepresentation to call men victims of the current social and political climate. This content is also gaining traction, and that, by the way, scares the shit out of them. According to the Movember Foundation, a leading men's health organization and UN Women partner, 2/3 of young men regularly engage with masculinity influencers online. Experts are finding that the popularity of extreme language in the manosphere not only normalizes violence against women and girls, but also has growing links to radicalization of extremist ideologies. So that's not just a word salad. I know it sounds like a word salad, but here's what they said, all right? They're scared because people are listening to what MRAs are saying about men and men's experiences, law and policy that is discriminatory, and social standards that are that disadvantage men and boys, and that are causing issues like low birth rates and stuff like that. Right? They're scared because we're talking about it and people are listening. They don't want to talk about us, right? They've just admitted that the Movember Foundation has gone feminist. If UN Women is partnering with them, it's not because the UN Women cares about men. It's because UN Women wants to control the narrative around men and men's issues, which is why they have this article. When the Movember Foundation initially began its thing, feminists made fun of them. Right now, when the Movember Foundation initially was created, their whole thing was raising money for treatment of testicular cancer and prostate cancer. Right, that was what they were doing, and feminists were offended. They were angry because they saw that as a means of taking away from their fundraising for breast cancer and their activism on breast cancer and their use of breast cancer as a female victimhood issue. Right? Because attention was being drawn to a male health condition instead, in their view. Not in addition, but instead. They don't view men's health and women's health as connected and things that should simultaneously be addressed and equally important. They view them as a zero-sum game. So if men's health is protected, women's health must be losing out. And if women's health is to be protected, men's health must lose out. That's the way feminists view it. It's not the case. In fact, gaining new information and advancements in medicine through attempting to advance women's health often benefits men, because many of the things we find out, unless you're talking about specific genital specific things, or female hormone specific things, most of the time there's benefit to both sexes. And any advancement in the fight against any type of cancer will have applications that can advance the fight against all different types of cancer. So approaching cancer from a variety of attack angles is not a bad thing either, right? There's a lot of organizations that get a shit ton of money claiming to do research on breast cancer, that when you look into them, huge amounts of it are only going to administrators and very little of it is actually going to the research. And there's been a lot of calling out of these organizations. There's been a lot of discussion about, this is happening, this is a problem, and all these women think that they're donating, and men think that they're donating money to these organizations, and they're saving the tatas, or their pink ribbons are reminding other people, and other people are donating, and they're saving the tatas. when in reality, they're just padding the CEO's wallet. But Movember, feminists really didn't get interested in the Movember Foundation as a thing they wanted to interact with besides making fun of it, until Movember started promoting men's mental health. And feminists have worked really hard to control how men's mental health is addressed. Right? They want that toxic masculinity narrative in your psychiatrist's repertoire of things that, they're using to treat. So if you're depressed, it's not just because you have a chemical imbalance, and it's not because you've got these circumstances, you've lost your job, you're getting a divorce, someone you love died, and you're going through the grieving process, or some other thing, you've gotten a bad diagnosis that you're reconciling with. None of that stuff, where they would approach it with women as, all right, let's process this, let's get through the stages in a healthy manner of coming to terms with this and deciding what you're going to do in response to it. Nope, it's, you're upset about this because of your toxic masculinity. You're upset about your divorce because you hate women and you think your wife doesn't have any rights. Not because it hurts to be abandoned. Shame on you, mister. Feel better now, or you're a bad person. Right? That's essentially where therapy is going with men. And feminists have been the influence, the informers of that change. And as a result, the psychiatric community has not been able to reduce the number of male suicides. In fact, they have been going up. So when the Movember Foundation started promoting men's mental health, feminists immediately jumped on their bandwagon and started telling them how they should do it and what ideas they should adopt. And they have pretty much become a feminist organization. So if when it comes time to support prostate cancer research and stuff, my recommendation personally is look up organizations that actually do the research, and make sure that you're double checking that the organization is spending its money on research and not just giving a bunch of money to the CEO. And you can find out various organizations. There are watchdogs that'll tell you, but you can find out what percentage of donations go to the cause of a charity versus the administrative workers and other administrative costs, like the cost of buildings and stuff like that. And give to those organizations that actually are doing something for men, and not organizations that are working with UN women. And again, the same thing when it comes to men's mental health. There are men's organizations that are working in the field of male psychology to help establish pathways for men to protect and preserve and heal their mental health when they have any kind of painful issue that they're dealing with. So, I hate to say it, but if they're working with UN women, the Movember Foundation is a lost cause. Fuck them. Like this is me splitting black on the Movember Foundation. They get no more support from me. And then after they've admitted that, right, when they're talking about 2/3 of young men regularly engage with masculinity influencers online, right? The scariest thing in the world of feminists is masculinity. Scariest. Absolute scariest. Okay. I shouldn't be watching the chat. I have a question. Chris Mizumo, describe in the chat exactly how a motorcyclist behaves. Behave, motorcyclist. What is the specific description of the behavior of a motorcyclist? Go ahead and stereotype motorcyclists in the chat now, because I happen to know one who actually started. Oh, I knew one who started the first hospital in the United States for children under the age of 6 who were severely or profoundly handicapped. That was, she rode a Harley. But in any case, yeah. So 2/3 of young men are learning about masculinity from men instead of women. How dare? Oh my God. Men are teaching boys how to be men. Women most affected. They really are scared of that. Like, they're terrified. And I'll tell you why, okay? Because a lot of these men are teaching boys how to identify, establish, communicate, and enforce their own boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot walk all over me. I will not allow you. Nothing scares women more than, actually, a family started that hospital, but the woman was the lead in the actions that took place. It was a boy's idea. But in any case, going on, yeah, nothing scares women more than running up against other people's boundaries.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. And they're losing control of the narrative. You know,
Oh yeah.
it's you can't just God, make me so fucking sick. You know, it's believe all women and you know what it's such crap, you know. Let men be men. Let boys learn how to be men, and you know, how to navigate around these women, these toxic fucking females.
Oh
But
yeah.
no, can't have that.
Yeah, imagine these boys when they grow up to be men. Like, feminists were really mad about this last election. We saw tantrum after tantrum online. And I think the funniest thing for me to come out of this election was how many women took the stupidest moment of their life, where they sat in their car and had a screaming temper tantrum because they didn't get the result they wanted in an election for an office that's only going to be in place for, the individual's only going to be there for 4 years, and he can't get another term because he's already had one,
Yeah.
right? So they have another chance in the next election, and their best chance is to present their ideas and explain to people why their ideas are the best ideas, and be tough about it if their ideas are the best ideas. And if their ideas are the best ideas, they will have good explanations for them, and they will have better luck getting people to accept those explanations than people with bad ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That's people listen when you can explain, how they are going to benefit from something versus how something is going to harm them. But in any case, instead, they main character syndromed in front of everybody. They put their most childish, whiny, irrational, shrewish, screaming responses to other people also having the right to vote on the internet for everybody to see. They melodramaed on the internet for everybody to see.
Which for me is great because I love to see these people get all pissy and whiny and cry. I point and laugh.
Yeah, it is funny on one hand, but on the other hand, it's like putting your mental illness out there for other
Yeah,
people to make fun of.
on display.
Like,
Yeah.
it's I had sort of a medical equivalent of roid rage for several years when I was young. They had me on 6 different medications that had steroids in them. at the same time because my asthma was so bad, and my allergies, and it was honestly, you know how you feel when maybe you have a physical ailment and at the same time a bunch of shit has gone wrong lately, and maybe PMS hits or something, like whatever, you didn't get enough sleep last night, like you're trying to quit caffeine or smoking or something, and you're having cravings, and just like your last nerve already has pressure on it, and all it takes is the wrong person to look the wrong way, and you are in the mood to just be an absolute, not just a Karen, but an uber Karen, to everybody around you, and just go off on the nearest, whatever. Like, I spent 15 years feeling that way most of the time.
Jeez.
Yeah, so I went and got help for it because, like, I didn't want other people to experience me acting on that out of control. That I knew that would hurt other people, and I also knew that it would destroy my relationships with the people I loved and wanted relationships with. So I didn't want people to see me as that person. I didn't want to be that person, right? I didn't want to be the person that reacted and acted like that. And it isn't just alien to me when these women do this, like, screaming temper tantrum bullshit. You know, it's horrifying. It's like watching somebody lose their cognitive abilities. It's like watching someone you love go through Alzheimer's. Even though that's a stranger online that I don't know, it's watching somebody have a mental breakdown, in my opinion. And it's a horrifying thing to see happen to somebody, that they, like watching somebody turn into a zombie,
Yeah.
So it's kind of the way I think of them. And like, I'll poke fun when people act like that, but when I do it, it's because I want it to be a phenomenon that becomes embarrassing for people to do, enough that they will think twice before they do it. Because, like, that's forever. A lot of these women have been memed. They 20 years from now might still be remembered for that, when they're trying to go for for promotions at work, or they're trying to be taken seriously as part of a community, long-standing community, where they've established themselves for years and years, and somebody may run across that. Was this you as a teenager? And they'll be like, yeah. Like, I can tell you right now, nearly every scrap of poetry that I wrote when I was a teenager has been burned. There are no copies. There is no memory of those things, because it was melodramatic bullshit, because I was a teenage girl on steroids. It's a terrible thing to do to a teenager, on steroids, and dealing with, like, we didn't even know that was a side effect for medications. So I was every bit as melodramatic as these women. I am so glad that TikTok didn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Because
I'm
I
I'm
wouldn't
of
want anybody to see that shit.
I'm of the half generation just behind you, and I bought my first camcorder at the age of 14, as a combined birthday and Christmas present, and I paid for half of it myself, over wealth that I had accumulated from other Christmas presents and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Like that's how determined I was to do what I now currently do for a living. Like, I'm on the cusp of the millennial generation, where it went beyond poetry. We could actually have our own video cameras. Little did we know that fucking 7 years later, anyone with a computer could do that shit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I even had a 4-track. I even tried to record music on a 4-track that only works with tapes. We, us early millennials, I believe zennials we're called, if we're on the cusp of Gen X. We existed in this world where we had mechanical devices for all this shit, and then a couple of years later, everything was on a computer. Everything.
And everybody could see it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and yes, there are many video clips of me trying to do funny skits with my camcorder at the age of 14. And I think they still exist on some dusty 8mm
Yeah.
videotapes somewhere. And yeah, like I echo Hannah's statement. I'm so glad that I got that shit out of my system when I could do it on a private device. Remember private devices? Man. Yeah. The Zoomers and the Gen Alphas who have had every embarrassing moment they've ever experienced recorded and shown for the entire world to see. Before they could even handle a camcorder. What's a camcorder, Mike? It doesn't matter. It's 90s kid stuff. But yeah.
What we had before cell phones, when you wanted to make a video, you had to have a camcorder. It recorded to analog up until, I want to say, it really wasn't, digital videography really wasn't that great until after the early 2010s. Like, digital photography was pretty good in the late 2000s, the late aughts, but videography is a more complex prospect.
And yeah, it all kind of gravitationally exploded into itself at the turn of the millennium, and then it went from nobody needed a mechanical device because everybody had a digital device, and it's been exploding ever since then. And it's I reiterate my point that I could barely understand what it's like to be a Zoomer or an Alpha, to have had every embarrassing moment you've ever experienced be recorded by some member of your family with the with the camcorder they have in their back pocket that's the size of 4 fucking tea bags. And yeah, the moment you start trying to say edgy shit on the internet, that edgy shit will be remembered forever. That's an awful feeling. Like, and I do understand it because I'm one of those millennials that was on the cusp of recording himself doing retarded shit.
Yep.
But
well, the worst part with feminists is some of these women that engaged in that kind of hyperbolic, absolute nutbag behavior online and recorded it. They set up a camera, then had their tantrums in front of the camera, and then edited the video by adding music and sometimes even captions, and put it on the internet for other people to see. Look at me doing this. This is what you get for me not liking the candidate that you voted into office. Some of them were my age. Some of them were not just old enough to know better, but they were old enough for the kids that they should have taught better to be adults with kids of their own that they should be teaching better. And that's women all over the country. That's women all over the world. Right? It's just amazing to me and horrifying. And the spectacle of it is one thing, but the implications that these women don't realize that they are clowning in front of the world, not influencing anybody who doesn't already agree with them. That horrifies me. Like, that's, you think women are adults, right? That can learn the tools that they need for success. They can develop those tools. And then they do shit like that. And it's like, how many women are that handicapped emotionally that they can't understand this doesn't influence people in the way that they are hoping. But yeah, definitely, scares them that young men are are being influenced by older men who demonstrate, here's what a boundary is, here's how to establish your boundaries, here's how to communicate your boundaries to women. And when women don't have their own boundaries, when women don't have their own wisdom and intelligence, here's how to manage them. When women are adult children, instead of grown women that can manage themselves, if you want to have a relationship with her anyway, here's how to manage her. That scares the fuck out of them. Right? It doesn't scare them that women are adult children. Many women who don't know how to manage themselves. It only scares them that those women don't have a means of taking advantage of boys and men. And then the last bit of this paragraph, right? Extreme language in the manosphere, right? Popularity of extreme language in the manosphere. I've had feminists tell me that. And I ask them what they mean by extreme language. And they'll point me to things like statements that an abused man who is targeted by extreme violence by his abuser, with extreme violence by his abuser, like the women who have poured boiling water, because it's happened more than once, on their victim, right? That they have a right to use violence to defend themselves if it's necessary to stop the abuse. These are the same women, by the way, who argue that even though there are hundreds of women's shelters all over every Western nation, every first world nation in the world, even though there are whole legal systems in place not only to help women escape from a home where they are being abused, but also to help them financially, to give them some financial power over their perpetrator, to make sure that they retain property, and in fact, even in many places, give them the property and kick the abuser out instead. That it's reasonable for a woman to wait it out until she gets an opportunity and kill her abuser. They argue that, and then say that it's extreme language for a man to suggest that if abuse is extreme that he's experiencing, he has the right to use violence to defend himself and should not be labeled an abuser just because his abuser is injured in the course of him using violence to defend himself. Like, their argument basically is that if a woman is the abuser, it's the man's responsibility to manage her, right? Rather than defending himself. The very thing that they're afraid that men will learn how to do from masculinity influencers. And then radicalization and extremist ideologies. So you ask a feminist what constitutes an extremist ideology. You don't hear about like ISIS or Hamas, or they don't even talk about the extremism coming out of the Israel side of the war between Israel and Palestine. Right? They don't talk about stuff like that. Right? They don't talk about extremist ideologies where there's a cult that causes people to isolate themselves from their families and friends and everything. Nope, it's men who advocate for 50-50 shared parenting. That's extremist to them. It's men who advocate for systems to be put into place that don't allow a woman abandoning a marriage to use the court system to bankrupt her ex. It's extremist to suggest that men have equal need, male victims have equal need for assistance in escaping their abusers and recovering from the abuse. That they are just as damaged by it. Right? That's extreme to them. So, their goal, their statement here, UN Women and our partners are taking action to challenge online misogyny and digital abuse. Through research, policy advocacy, and survivor support, programming, and campaigns that push back against toxic masculinity, we're working to make digital spaces safer and more equal for everyone. So let's look at this research, feminist research. All right, let's look at a bit of history about feminist research. In 1987, in Ohio, no, it was a Kent State professor, not Ohio State professor. It was Ford Ed in Ohio, Kent State. It was a Kent State professor, Mary P. Koss, was pushed to the forefront of feminist research on sexual violence prevalence in the United States. There was a push during that time, during the entire 1980s and part of the 1970s, among feminists to find a way to obtain statistics that showed a high rate of sexual violence against women perpetrated by men in the United States. That was their goal, not finding out the prevalence, not establishing what is fact, but establishing their narrative as the prevailing narrative. Right? They wanted to prove rape culture. So various ones came up with different ways of doing surveys because they couldn't get it from crime statistics. Crime statistics did not show the rate of victimization that they wanted. Even statistics on crime reporting, where women made allegations, if they counted every allegation as true, they still weren't getting a high rate. Right? If they counted only convictions, the rate was like 1 in 800 something. And if they counted reports that never made it to court because they were either debunked or the woman abandoned the case or there wasn't enough evidence for the police to pursue a case or anything like that, it was still like really one in the hundreds. And the closest to a realistic survey answer that they had was a researcher who found 1 in 50, which would be enough to call it an epidemic, but they weren't satisfied with that. And the researcher basically counted answers to have you or anyone you know been raped, as each answer was, an example of a rape. And so 1 in 50 women answered yes to that question in that research. Have you or anyone you know been raped? Well, how many people do you know? So it's not 1 in 50 women have been raped. It's 1 in 50 women at least knows someone who has. Reported that they at least know someone who has. Right. So they weren't satisfied with that. So Mary P. Koss came up with this question, this means of questioning where instead of asking if the crime had been committed, have you experienced this crime, name of crime? She had 10 questions. She asked women, have you ever had sex when you didn't want to because? And then the condition that feminists deemed rape as the rest of the question. So because someone forced you, because a man forced you, obviously that would be rape. That was the legal definition of the term. Have you ever had sex when you didn't want to because, and then it would go on, because a man put social pressure on you, because a man bought you alcohol or gave you alcohol, was one of the questions. The questions included because that wasn't necessarily considered rape. Rape, intoxicant facilitated sexual assault back then And even today in most places, requires incapacitation, some level of incapacitation, and not just um, you had a drink and now you're relaxed. Like that's not what the law says, right? But feminists basically didn't say because you were drunk or because you couldn't resist due to intoxication or even because your inhibitions were lowered by alcohol, but because a man gave you alcohol. So any woman that had chosen to have sex with a guy after connecting with him at a bar, when they had decided for themselves when they left the house earlier, I'm not going to have sex tonight, I'm not going to go home with some guy tonight, and then change their mind during the night, might have answered yes to that question. And so she got a result in university of 1 in 8. 1 in 8 of her respondents, she deemed that they had been raped. And in her post survey, like the survey about the survey that they did, um, she also had asked questions about whether they identified the experience that they said yes about as a rape. And only 1 in 4 of her respondents agreed with her definition, her characterization of what had happened to them. And actually, something like 42 or 43% of them had gone on to have sex with their alleged perpetrators again. So clearly, there is a difference between how the women experienced what Koss was deeming rape and how Koss viewed their experiences, right? But Gloria Steinem, who was the founder of Ms. Magazine, she came across that research and she decided that she wanted to publish it. So she had Koss do a nationwide survey with the same set of questions. And that survey, Koss didn't ask if her respondents agreed with her or not. Right? She didn't ask those questions because she didn't like the answers. And she didn't survey any men about their experiences with women. She only surveyed women about their experiences with men. And so she got this result: 1 in 4 women by the time they are college age have been raped. And it was published as that was a fact, that 1 in 4 women had been raped by the time they were in college. Of course, several critics came out immediately examining the survey method and said there are a lot of flaws in this. Right? It's not clear enough. Some of these things that you are designating as rape are not legally defined as rape, and they don't involve the alleged perpetrator using any means at all to override the alleged victim's will. Right? Some of these are just things that could be a miscommunication between you and the respondent, and some of them are perfectly normal behaviors. Right? A lot of people have sex after they've been drinking, and they're still in control of their actions. They're in control of their actions enough to decide whether or not to drive. They're in control of their actions to decide whether or not to go home with someone. They're in control of their actions enough to decide whether or not to make a financial transaction. They aren't under the legal level, or they aren't over the legal level of alcohol that would get them out of a contract. But feminists deem that it's rape if they have sex, that they've been raped, but only if it's a woman. If it's a dude, then it's abuse if he accuses his partner of raping him. So that research then got promoted all over the country. It's been cited since 1987 in every feminist work that does rape prevalence research, that involves rape prevalence research. It is the standard. In 1993, she wrote a paper on doing rape prevalence research, in which she stated that it's not the same for a woman to override a man's will. If a man has an experience of unwanted sexual contact, that it's not as bad. And her only reason really was because I said so. That was it. Because Mary Koss said so, a man's experience of being sexually victimized can be dismissed as less than the experience of a sexually victimized woman. And in 2012, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States did a survey for the first time called the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, NISVS, that they used Mary Koss's standards as cited. They used that standard for defining rape. So they defined rape as every means of engaging in coitus or oral sex or anal sex that didn't involve a woman forcing a man. So everything that involved being forcibly penetrated, nothing that involved being forced to penetrate. And so after that came out, 2014, they did another one, and same standards. And we in the men's rights movement were trying to figure out, why they did that, and we traced it to Koss because she was cited as a source in their the full version of the research report. And so I contacted them. I did an FOIA for their raw data, which they did not publish. They only published statements about the data, and they published some statistics from the data, but not the full set of statistics. So there was stuff that they hid, and they actually responded to my FOIA by hiding the raw data in a university and stipulating that the university had to have a council that would approve or disapprove people's access to it, and in order to prevent another FOIA. Like they literally took measures to prevent the public from seeing the raw data. That should tell you something. They didn't want people to know what they actually found. And it did come out later in Stimple's report that there's a reason for that. They found a lot more female victimization of men than they wanted to admit. But in any case, I filed that report, and they wouldn't give me the information that they had to give me in response to the FOIA, unless I engaged in a phone call with them where they could tell me how I could use it. And so I used the phone call as an opportunity to interview them. And I asked them, why did you define rape to exclude being forced to penetrate, the primary way the female victims would rape a guy? Why did you exclude that? And they didn't have an answer, because they didn't know. They didn't know why they excluded being forced to penetrate from the definition of rape. It had been hidden under so many years of just feminists just citing it as we got this from here, without any vetting as to this is a good definition or not, without any critical analysis of Koss's reasoning for that stipulation. They just used it, and they didn't know. They could not tell me. And then they lied. They said it was the first time anybody ever looked into male victims, which wasn't true. There had been other research on male victims. So when they say through research, that's not what feminists do. They don't research. They create propaganda, and they wrap it in an illusion of research. And then they use that for policy advocacy. COS's 1987 rape survey was one of the things that was cited on the Senate floor during the debate over the usefulness and validity and constitutionality and everything. Should we pass, basically, the 1994 Violence Against Women Act, which has been law now for 30 years. But that law partly got passed because COS's invalid survey method that labeled things that were not rape as rape, and then produced inflated statistics that were one-sided, helped to persuade congressmen that they needed to pass that law. Right? So they propagandize, they wrap their propaganda in the false guise of research, and then they use it to get policy passed. The Violence Against Women Act was not the feminists will tell you that it was the first law in the United States that federally addressed violence against women, but that's not true. There were previous federal laws that addressed family violence and that addressed the types of violence that family violence is made up of: assault and battery, rape, any kind of abuse. Like, there were other laws that addressed that. And the main conflict that the United States had was that some local police departments might consider violence to be a family matter when it happened in the home. Like, prior to the Violence Against Women Act, 10 years before that, there was a Family Violence Prevention and Services Act of 1984, signed into law by Ronald Reagan, that established a 24-hour hotline. It established shelter funding from the federal government. It established advocates for victims. It established policy for local police departments and training for local police departments that basically said, just because an assault happens in a home between family members doesn't mean it's not an assault, and you still have to treat it as one. So it wasn't like the Violence Against Women Act was necessary for protecting women, right? It was necessary for providing the state with power. And that's what it did. It attacked due process rights. It attacked family unity. And it strove to prevent reconciliation. And so if you had a family where there was abuse taking place, but the conflict could be reformed, like the individuals could learn better ways of managing when they had conflict with each other, so they didn't abuse each other. That, especially where abuse was two-way, a lot of times you can learn to not get into patterns of violence when you're having an argument, and to sit down and discuss things like adults and come to a conclusion, respect each other's opinions and experiences, and expect the same will be done for your own. And there is therapy that helps with that, and it does work. And there were situations prior to 1994 where that could be done. Reconciliation could occur, and a divorce wouldn't have to happen, custody battles wouldn't have to happen, and so on. After 1994, the Violence Against Women Act became a custody battle machine, right? To give women advantage in custody battles. So that's their policy advocacy. They don't advocate for policy to prevent violence or to deal with the issues, the underlying issues that cause violence. They advocate for policy to break up families and punish men. Survivor support, right? I'm a survivor. I think I've told my experiences probably 100 times more than I ever wanted to. I've been a survivor of both non-sexual violence and sexual violence. And when I talk to MRAs about my experiences, I get support for my recovery and my ability to move forward with my life as a non-victim who was, during the experience, a victim, and after the experience, a recovering victim, and then a recovered survivor who is not under the power of my perpetrators because they can't affect me now. Right? I get support for that from the men's rights movement. From the feminist movement, I get, how dare you? How dare you recover? How dare you not be traumatized for the rest of your life about this? Don't you know that you're harming other women? If you're capable of functioning, if you're capable of functional trauma responses and trauma recovery, the feminist movement doesn't have power over you, and they can't exploit you, and they don't like that. So survivor support is basically about how to maintain lifelong victim status while serving the movement and exploiting it. Like, a card you can play anytime you're not happy with something somebody says or does. Then they have programming and campaigns that push back against toxic masculinity. So that's an interesting word they used there, right? Programming. Like, I know that when they're saying that, the thing that they intend for you to picture isn't like programming a computer programming, like brainwashing people programming, but like creating programs that assist people in reforming their way of thinking, right? Creating seminars and workshops and stuff like that, right? But it's not how it comes across when you know what they're like. So, and to me, that's an admission that they are brainwashing. And of course, toxic masculinity, for those who do not know, so like probably some of y'all in the vertical chat don't know this, I'm sure. Some of our newer listeners won't know this, but the term toxic masculinity also has a history. In the 60s, there was a researcher in Australia who went by the name, and I hope we don't get busted for dead naming, but who went by the name of Robert Connell. And that name is on a lot of research. Robert Connell's name is on a lot of research. So it exists out there. It's out there. It's not going away. And I don't believe I've run across any evidence that there's been a change, like any future publications of that same research where the attribution is changed, right? Connell studied feminist theory and studied feminist, mostly patriarchy theory, and started developing a aversion, I guess. Oikophobia would be the best way to put it, right? And so Connell started viewing masculinity in general as a prison that he was trapped in. And over time came to the conclusion that this was gender dysphoria, and transitioned and is now Raewyn Connell, and has been, if I don't know how old Connell is, and I don't know if Raewyn Connell is still around, probably, but I believe Connell was a boomer, so I'm not sure, because that generation is kind of dying off. But the formulation of the concept of toxic masculinity, which essentially ascribes traits that are immature to men and boys, and to masculinity, and even though they are committed by both sexes, like violence, using violence against other people as a means of addressing conflict. So there's a whole paper defining it, and Connell took the term hegemony. There was a term for that cultural hegemony, maybe pronouncing it wrong, but it's not like alimony, right? But cultural hegemony is essentially the structure of how the culture determines the personality development of people who live in it. There's a much longer description for cultural hegemony than that, or explanation, but that's essentially what that explanation describes, right? And he took that and came up with the term hegemonic masculinity, which was the same thing, the structure, the scaffolding on which the culture creates its influences of the character personality development of males within that culture. And then toxic masculinity, the long explanation that Connell, the inventor of the term, gives for that, goes through and cites a specific set of behaviors that both sexes engage in when they are immature, that both sexes continue to engage in during adulthood if they don't mature properly, and deems them masculine characteristics that exist as a phenomenon of toxic masculinity, even though those same characteristics also exist in women and girls. Right? So it is a means by which feminists describe toxic behavior as masculine in order to demonize men and boys. And in order to do that, they have to present the sugar and spice version of women and girls. And in fact, if feminists even acknowledge, most of the time they don't acknowledge toxic femininity as a potential thing, right? If they do acknowledge it, where with men and boys, it's defined in terms of behaviors that are that affect other people, or that make the man or boy less usable by other people. When they talk about it with women and girls, it's described in terms of having to consider other people's feelings and experiences, and maybe being more of service to the people around them as toxic femininity. So you can sort of see that distinction there. So with all that in mind, the rest of the sentence, "we're going to make digital spaces safer and more equal for everyone," sounds Orwellian and really nefarious, right? Malicious. When they say safer, they don't mean safer. They mean more feminist controlled. And they do all of that. They establish all of that before they talk about the manosphere. What is the manosphere? They ask. All right, what's the manosphere? The manosphere is an umbrella term for online communities that have increasingly promoted narrow and aggressive definitions of what it means to be a man. So that's their definition of the manosphere, which by their definition would exclude the entire men's rights movement. But they will deem us part of the manosphere and lump us in with anybody that's actually doing what they're saying here, which I actually haven't run into that. I don't see a whole lot of increasingly narrow definitions for what it means to be a man. Like most discussion about what it means to be a man online determines the difference between what it means to be a man versus what it means to be a boy. And the false narrative that feminism and gender equality, notice they like to associate those two things together, right? Feminism and gender equality, kind of like women and children, right? Have come at the cost of men's rights.
This is, by the way, this is why it's important to get your definitions in order before you start talking to people. Because this, online communities that have increasingly promoted narrow and aggressive definitions of what it means to be a man. Right. That describes feminism. That absolutely describes feminism. It describes a whole bunch of niches in all kinds of hobbies that have adopted this feminist mindset. And like, how do you describe what you believe in a way that your enemies do not describe what they believe? This is something I encountered in fucking thing we went to in LA. I can't remember what it was. VidCon. It was VidCon. That one time I went there and we met up with a bunch of fans and stuff. And I remember trying to get someone to describe what is the difference between us and them. And they were like, well, we use our intelligence. And I'm like, yeah, right. That's they would say that about us. They would say they're the intelligent ones, and that we're not. Like, what actually makes us different from them, if we are to draw this us and them line? And it's remarkably difficult because we've had decades, indeed generations, of feminists naming the problem, and the opponents of feminists not quite being able to name the problem. And yeah, it goes on and on. Like, the people are so bubbled up in this foam of anti-definitions that they've forgotten how to even describe the difference between them and their enemies. But they sort of generally know what it is. And yeah, I imagine that's going to be the reaction of most of the people listening to me right now. Yeah, we kind of know the difference. And this is why I keep screaming the word oikophobia, because the difference is xenophobia and oikophobia. It's the difference is destroying your own kind because you don't know what else to do, or destroying all the other kinds because that's what you do.
Yep.
And yeah, we at all times ought to be in a world where we balance these two things, where we control our own selves and control the other people, because that's what we're supposed to do. I don't know why I even need to expand any further on that. We ought to control our own people and control the other people too. But we're in a world where the only thing we're allowed to do is control our own people. And this is where we've found ourselves in this whirlpool of a fucking article that we're currently discussing. And yeah, I guess I'll let you carry on.
It's an interesting thing. You know, we've sort of devolved into this situation where I would call it this pathological politeness has taken over. Now, granted, like all human beings, we are born feral. Just like every other animal in the world. Born feral. Right? And our parents civilize us. We don't start out civilized. We do have some social instincts, if we're fortunate, that will assist us in becoming civilized, because we learn as we interact with each other. And if you grow up in a neighborhood, like I grew up in a neighborhood in the 1970s and 1980s, where it was like the kids in the 80s on TV. You got to go out all day within your neighborhood, where your parents weren't like 6 feet away from you the entire day. And so we played rough. We fought with each other, and we learned to negotiate differences of opinion, conflicts of interest between two people. by means other than violence, because violence is, demonstrate itself over and over again to not be a preferable way to handle the situation. Both sides always get hurt, right? When kids get into a fight, almost always. And you don't maintain friendships through violence. You maintain animosity. So kids develop negotiation skills. They develop consideration for other people's experiences and opinions and interests. And they develop a system of trading, like, I'll compromise my interest in X, and you can compromise your interest in Y, and we can play Z game together without beating each other up, right? And we were the last generation that was allowed to do that on the full generational scale. Like, the next generation, which started with the youngest boomers, youngest kids, for the most part. Like, at that point, there were things that had changed in our communities that made it less reasonable to let your kid walk a block away to a playground and play, where you would just be able to see them out the window, or you would know that their friend's mom could see the kids out the window and would let you know if something was going on, right? Or it might even dole out discipline if there was a close relationship between the families and such an agreement existed. Which my family did have that with other families. The teacher aide that was always out on the playground at school when I was a kid was also the mother of one of my best friends growing up. And I remember one time I did something that I think I ran out in front of a car. It was something really stupid, one stupid childhood thing. And when I got across the street to her side, she swatted me on the butt. And, do not ever do that again. I'm going to have to, let your mom know. And I was like, I went home to get ahead of the narrative and told on her. And I got disciplined again. It's like that boomer generation didn't fuck around with that shit. Like, you might get hit by a car. I am going to make you afraid to run out in the road like that again, because I'm not going to be there to watch and grab you by the arm and stop you. Therefore, you should be terrified to run out in front of a car, terrified of getting caught, terrified of getting hit by a car. And that kind of terrorist parenting is the reason why I never started smoking, because my family has a predisposition to get cancer from that. And my father pulled no punches telling me what it was like to watch his mother die from that. And so, like, that he scared the shit out of me, and I never started smoking. Boomers, that's how boomers disciplined. But yeah, today you grow up in an environment where you're not allowed to navigate those boundaries by trial and error, and so you don't learn them. And I think millennials and Zoomers and Gen Alpha, I don't think they have an understanding as much of how the function of early childhood development differs when children are learning by discovery, learning through discovery, that there are better ways and worse ways to engage with each other socially. And I suspect that might be part of the reason for the generational, it's not a big part of it, but it's part of the reason for the generational increase in diagnoses like attention deficit disorder and autism and personality disorders like cluster B personality disorders, because there are aspects of all of those that, even if a person has a predisposition to develop them, you, by learning those life lessons, you manage yourself better, and you may be a more high functioning person, even with those predispositions, if you have established it for yourself, learned through discovery, and used that discovery learning to cement in your mind the best methods that work the best for you and the people around you, for you engaging back and forth with people. And there can always be supports for people who don't do so well learning through discovery. But the primary way that human beings learn things is through discovery. The things that we keep the best and the most and the longest, like language development, happen through discovery. Nobody sits you down as a child with a textbook and a test and makes you tell them, the words. They repeat them to you over and over again. And you watch the way that their mouth moves, and you test out moving your mouth that way and making those sounds, and you discover the formation of words. Nobody sits you down with a textbook at a desk and a pen and paper and has you write out a description of how to crawl and how to walk. You try it and you learn it. You discover how to keep your balance, and you discover how to move forward, and you discover how to push yourself upright, and you discover how to move forward after you've done that. And these are things that you wouldn't be able to teach in a classroom setting. It was learning through discovery. There's a lot of stuff. Most people learn whistling through discovery. If they learn how to whistle, most people learn how to tie their shoes through discovery. They watch it, they mimic it, they do it, and then that discovery of this is how it works. When you finally it clicks and you see how it works and you imitate it and you see you can do it, learning through discovery. Right? But that's been taken away when it comes to establishing social connections and social boundaries and behavioral preferences. Like, here's how I'm going to handle this because this works better. And that's maturity is often is mostly the process of determining things that are more effective, efficient, considerate of your neighbor, and better at making you part of a community as opposed to an isolated loner. Right? That's the process of maturing. And, figuring out the smarter, not the harder way of handling things, essentially. A lot of us put ourselves through the school of self-inflicted hard knocks on the way, right? Like, I reached for a power line and got shocked. I put my foot in hot coals. I I went swimming in one of the most nasty lakes and cut my foot and had to get 4 different shots to prevent me from getting infections. Just all kinds of stuff like that. Fell out of trees. Discovered that you don't want to slide down a fireman's pole while you're wet by injuring myself. Just all kinds of stuff like that. Discovered that squirrels don't like being picked up. Um, discovered which bugs bite and which ones don't, and what to leave alone. All that kind of stuff. It was kind of boys and girls both do that if they're allowed. But yeah, what you end up with then is, as people mature, and when they're allowed to mature naturally, and they're encouraged to mature naturally, instead of being stuck in a situation where they're not allowed to learn conflict management through discovery, and they're also not given proper guidance on conflict management. That develops adults that are not mature, both sexes, and both sexes, when they engage in violence, that violence is an immature behavior. Predatory behavior is an immature behavior. Dishonest behavior is an immature behavior. Right? All of that is a failure to mature. And it doesn't have to do with gender. but feminists have gendered it. And that's when you want to know the definition of toxic masculinity, what does that mean? That's what that means. It means feminists deeming immature behaviors, right, maladaptions or failures to adapt as a masculine thing, and ignoring the fact that they happen just as often with women and girls. And they manifest in a lot of the same ways. So they give this the manosphere narrow and aggressive definitions of what it means to be a man. Right? Feminists do not accept the idea that if a man is victimized, he deserves as much sympathy as a woman deserves if she is victimized. So part of their definition of being a man is that you are cannon fodder. You are not as deserving of human compassion. That's feminism. Nobody else defines it that way, right? Even tradcons have the ability to recognize that harm to a man has consequences for the man, and he deserves recourse. So they go on, these communities promote the idea that emotional control, material wealth, physical appearance, and dominance, especially over women, are markers of male worth. So there's a limited set of people that do that. Almost nobody does that. But some dating coaches do. Some male dating coaches do. Pickup artists do. But, if you look at the men's rights movement as it has existed for a century, they don't do that. I challenge you to go through every book, for instance, that Dr. Warren Farrell has ever written and find anywhere where he suggests that dominance over women is a marker of male worth. Anywhere. Find one. Find a place where he said that in an interview, right? Find a place where he's lived that. Because it doesn't exist. And if you motherfuckers, UN Women, feminists, National Organization for Women, the feminists in our chat, if you motherfuckers had bothered to listen to the things he had to say when you had the chance, you wouldn't be dealing with Andrew fucking Tate. I guess Tate's the Malcolm X to the men's rights movement's Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King. Like, obviously, there was one of the films that I saw portraying the history of those two men. They had a meeting. If it's to be understood as an accurate portrayal, and I have a tendency to believe this did happen, because King had a very specific set of ways that he wanted to engage with the public in order to communicate the value of people of color, and the fact that being prejudiced, being mistreating them, discriminating against them under the law and so on was unreasonable, foolish, and uncivilized, right? And it worked. It was effective. It was persuasive to many people. And at the other end of it, Malcolm X was more of a revolutionary, and he had more in-your-face tactics, right? More socially threatening tactics, and King didn't like it. That was definitely a conflict between the two of them, and apparently they had a conversation where, he asked him. King asked Malcolm X to tone it down. Malcolm X said, "Nope, not going to do that." But let me be the threat the public has to see that if they don't listen to you, they get me. They have to deal with me. And I think that's kind of what's going on right now with dating influencers that do talk about how to manage women, right? The guys that are pretty much fed up with the idea that you could work with the establishment and or take over the establishment, and maybe change the laws and the policies and change the culture. They're like, nope, we're stuck in this culture, we're stuck in this establishment, we're stuck with these laws. Here's how to navigate it all. And fuck the idea of compromise. Just here's how to manage and manipulate your way through it, because you're never going to see honesty and integrity from the other side. And I can see their perspective. I mean, I especially see it when I talk to women about reproductive issues. Like they will engage in the most convoluted and bizarre mental gymnastics to try to justify imbalances in accountability between men and women, where women are less accountable and benefit more from social protections and legal protections, and where men can be taken advantage of and harmed and have no legal recourse and no social recourse, and they'll bend over backwards for that, and they'll even deny biology. They'll deny all of the advancements in mental health treatment. They'll deny facts about gestation and early childhood development. They'll deny legal standards that exist. They'll deny court cases, or they'll say that the reality of the situation doesn't matter because they disagree with it. Well, I don't support that, so therefore you can't use it as an argument. Your support doesn't matter, right? It can be used as an argument because it is reality, and it doesn't matter if reality doesn't support like your side of the argument, and you don't like the implications of that reality. It's still true. The idea that the narrative that feminism is gender equality, is like the idea that that feminism is gender equality is another one. This paragraph is such a gish gallop. We're gonna get through this article, I swear. Feminism isn't about gender equality. If it was, feminists would not be arguing that women should have reproductive rights that men do not have, and that women should have legal powers as mothers that take away men's financial autonomy. They wouldn't be arguing that fathers should not have equal custody rights in their family. They wouldn't be arguing that women should get paid by their employer for things they do for themselves and their family at home, but men shouldn't get paid for things they do for their employer that women don't. Like, they wouldn't. That's not equality. There's nothing equal about that. They wouldn't be arguing that women should have access to difficult and dangerous jobs, but with lower standards for work performed, and lower standards for capability of doing that work. They wouldn't be arguing that, because that's not equality. If they were about equality, they wouldn't be arguing that uniquely in cases where the accuser is female and the defendant is male, due process rights in criminal courses, court cases should be compromised. Right? They wouldn't be arguing that because it's not equality. but they are. They wouldn't be arguing that it's a good thing if men and boys fall behind in education and 2/3 of successes in education are female. So that's not equality. Like, they wouldn't be arguing that the crime, the nature of the crime, is determined by how many people perpetrate and not what it does to the victim, in order to justify unequal treatment of male victims, because it's still not equality. So the idea that feminism and equality, gender equality, should just be lumped together is bullshit. Feminism is a female supremacy movement. It is an establishment exploitation of gynocentrism movement. And the idea that they haven't come at the cost of men's rights. Feminists have spent longer than I've been alive opposing the rights of fathers to ensure their own ability to mentor their children, right? In favor of mothers. Even when the mother is not a good parent, even when the mother might be dangerous to the child, even when the mother is abusive. They've gone from opposing joint custody during the 60s and 70s to opposing shared parenting during the late 80s and the 90s to opposing equally shared parenting in the 21st century. It's been a very long losing battle because both parents are important to the child. You cannot just limit the child's experience to the mother's parenting. But yeah, they're definitely, their advocacy, their activism has come at a cost of men's rights. Their advocacy has affected due process rights uniquely toward men. Their advocacy has affected funding for students, for crime victims, for any benefits at all that citizens get from the establishment, that holding their taxes and then paying for systems to help them with tough situations. That men have less access specifically because of feminist advocacy. Right?
How dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you? I'm just going to keep saying, how dare you?
How dare you?
until you stop realizing the context of what I'm saying.
It's sad. They do this. They will say these things, right? And they'll act like nobody should question this. They'll phrase it in such a way as to make it seem unquestionable. That obviously, feminism is about equality, right? And obviously, men haven't been harmed by feminism in any way. Like, and then when you actually look at the situation, it's pretty obvious that that's a lie. So again, Gish Gallop, right? Then it goes on to the next paragraph. The manosphere targets male audiences on social media, podcasts, gamer communities. So wait a minute, because when the Gamergate controversy happened, one of the first things that we were told as consumers who were objecting to hidden advertising disguised as opinion pieces and articles, actual assessment of games and stuff, when we were objecting to rigged contests, right? When we were objecting to a rigged system of reviews and so on, when we were objecting to essentially the manipulation of the player and the influx of non-play elements in our games that were just political bullshit, that were like attempts at political brainwashing. When we objected to that, we were told we were attacking female gamers, that the gaming audience is genderless, that we were, excluding half of the gaming community because half of the gaming community was women. But this article says that gamer communities are a male audience. Women need to make up their minds. Then it goes on, dating apps. Dating apps are a male audience. In just about all digital spaces. Many participants engage with it while searching for forums to openly discuss or learn about men's issues. Gee, I wonder why. Why on earth would the most in your face part of the huge and broad discussion about men's issues come up first in searches about men's issues? Very, very odd, right? It's almost like you have to engage in hyperbole to be heard when talking about men's issues. Then it goes on, but while content may appear focused on men's self-improvement, many of these groups promote unhealthy behaviors like instructing boys to build themselves up by putting others down. And again, I haven't seen that, but I believe that they are referring to pickup artists again. Like feminists usually talk about things like negging and stuff like that, which is where you yeah, yeah, I know. Quicksilver tongue. Dating apps are a male audience. Yeah. That blew my mind, considering the fact that most of the people on dating apps are women. But not me, because I don't have to do that. I'm married, so it's easy for me. But anyway, yeah, this idea of men building themselves up by putting each other down. The only place I've seen that is that idea of negging, which is essentially giving a compliment that has an insult wrapped inside of it, which, men learned that from women, doing that to other women. Like, they might have done it to each other, but in terms of using that to control a woman's behavior, men learned that from women doing that to other women. So why the manosphere appeals to young men online, it says. Extreme content in the manosphere gains traction most among young men who feel isolated. So let's make them feel more isolated, right, UN Women? According to the UN Women Partner and Research Group, self-citation there, at Equimundo's State of American Men 2023 report, 2/3 of young men feel no one really knows me. Well, maybe it's because you're characterizing them without getting to know them first. The truth is, it is normal to seek community in digital spaces. Many of us build a sense of identity, nurture interests, and find like-minded people online. Young men often stumble across manosphere influencers while searching for tips on fitness, dating, or cryptocurrency. They had to throw cryptocurrency in there. Oh, watch out for the crypto bros! In the Movember Foundation survey, many said that they found the content entertaining or motivating. The manosphere's self-proclaimed lifestyle coaches have drawn young men in by claiming to teach personal responsibility, but ironically, instead of encouraging the self-exploration that can get to the heart of men's challenges, by that they mean self-demonization, because that's what feminists teach boys and men to do. They suggest men are victims of society's misandry, meaning prejudice against men. And of course, they're characterizing that they're painting that with a very broad brush. Like, I have watched male influencers, even the ones that aren't really part of the men's rights sphere, the ones that are just trying to tell boys and men how to get a date or how to navigate just the social order of things and the legal system and everything. Like, if they see a guy engaging in actively self-destructive behavior, they castigate him for it. And it's not gentle either. It's a "what the fuck are you doing, dumbass" kind of castigation. Which is, women think that's really harsh. So it's amazing that feminists didn't notice this. But yeah, they only notice when men point out that if a man is discriminated against, he's a victim of discrimination just as much as a woman is if she's discriminated against. That's a good question for our resident feminist here. If discrimination victimizes the person that is being discriminated against, what is your excuse for claiming that it is unreasonable to call men victims when they are discriminated against? The the way they bolded misandry there is funny too. The UN Security General's report found that the expansion of the manosphere coincides with growing conservatism among men. They see that as a threat too. Conservatives are family people, right? They believe that the strongest unit in the country is not the state, but the family. And so the feminist attempt, the feminist goal of breaking up families is threatened by conservatism. So they don't like them. Conservatism among young women, which sees efforts to achieve women's equality as discriminating against men. They keep repeating that. What are they defining as equality? I don't know if she's still talking in here. I think she may have left. But Chris Mizuno there, that keeps making feminist statements in the chat, is our resident feminist. He's in almost every chat. Seems to have cropped up right after Carly Ellison disappeared. So, in a study by UN Women and the Unstereotype Alliance, which is hilarious because feminists are stereotyping men in this article, younger men are more likely than older men to hold stereotypical views on gender roles. Manosphere ideologies. This is probably going to be the last bit. We'll start with the paragraph introducing this, and then we'll reread the headline and the paragraph next week, okay? Because it's 9:00. Manosphere ideologies, how the manosphere portrays women. While groups within the manosphere do not all share the same beliefs. Oh my God, they admitted it. That's amazing. Like, they don't usually do that. While groups within the manosphere do not all share the same beliefs, many are united in their misogyny, a prejudice and resentment of women and girls. In many ways, the manosphere is descended from a long line of anti-feminist movements. And then it says, these major groups, manosphere groups, spread myths, pseudoscience, and lies based on gender. And they go through and they have and they put incels at the top, then men's rights activists, pickup artists, men going their own way, and then went on to discuss red pill ideology, all women are like that, femoids or FHOs, and hypergamous, the term hypergamous. So we'll get into that next week, And then we will also read their ideas on how to counter the manosphere's toxic influence. And but with that, I'm going to read our super chows. We got one at the beginning from Meredith G, our top G, who gave us $5 and said HBR Talk 365, honey for the Badgers. And then we have Cloyd, who gave us $10 and said, I thought digital abuse was non-consensual fingering. There we go. And I believe there was the term for a long time because of that, digital rape, because of non-consensual fingering. But yeah, they didn't this time use the term online violence, which I think is funny. And online violence, like the term online violence doesn't refer to like violence on the internet, like violence on television refers to violence on television, where you see a portrayal of violence. And there's this theory that it desensitizes people and causes them to be less predisposed to avoid violence, right? It's words on the internet, or the communications basically on the internet, that have no physical manifestations in the real world outside of the internet. It's feminists defining that as violence. So saying things people don't like, they've defined saying things that people don't like as a violent act. They've defined the presentation of images, because they can't just call it abuse, right? I had an argument. I've had many arguments with people who call themselves minor attracted, which is essentially just their way of not using the word nonce or pedo to describe their perversions. And I've like got into arguments with them from as early as maybe 2010 on X, because they've had a long-standing effort in place to try to portray that as a normally, naturally occurring sexuality that's no different than being gay or bisexual, which is bullshit. It's a sign of psychological damage that requires treatment to undo, and in some instances may not be curable. But it's not a sexuality. It's not a sexual preference for body type. And the argument that this happened in, I ended up getting the person to admit that. And I went through a series of questions asking, well, what if you ran across a person who had behavioral adult maturity, that they had responsibility for themselves, that they learned to navigate the community, the world around them in functional ways. They learned the smarter ways of doing things, and therefore were nonviolent, non-confrontational, unless there was a really solid reason for it, and things like that. That they earned their own living and stuff like that, but their body didn't develop, because there's a disorder that can cause that. Gary Coleman had it. Like for Gen Xers, like I don't know if anybody of later generations knows him, but he played children on in various roles of children on TV well into his adulthood, because he had this disorder that like you don't actually develop at the same speed as other people physically. And so he looked like a child, like into his 30s, maybe 40s. But in any case, like the person said, no, that wouldn't be the same, because the individual wouldn't have childhood innocence. And I said, wait a minute, you're using the term innocence, but what a child has isn't innocence, it's vulnerability, right? Because children can do bad things. So they're not innocent, they're feral. And they're developing a more civilized approach to living in a community as they grow. And they're learning to defend themselves and have their own boundaries, how to establish all of that. They haven't learned that yet. And so they are more defenseless than an adult, right? They're more vulnerable to exploitation. They're more vulnerable to being tricked. and bullied into doing things that they're not ready to do. And that is what really defines the difference between a child and an adult in terms of whether or not they can consent to something, whether they can understand that consent. And, this person got mad at me. Like, what you're saying is I'm a predator. You're calling me a predator. Well, yes. Because what you are defining as a sexuality is a desire to only have someone who is not yet emotionally developed enough and not yet mentally developed enough to determine their own personal boundaries, to establish those boundaries, to communicate them to you, and to enforce them if you tread on them. That's what you're looking for in a child, not a lack of tits, not a lack of body hair in a boy. It's that vulnerability, that helplessness. That's why I don't agree. It's one of the reasons why I don't agree with people who claim that it's just the same for a middle-aged person to have an affair with a grown adult who is in their 20s or early 30s, as it is for a pedophile to attack a child. Like, it's clearly different because a grown adult in their 20s and 30s has developed the capability of establishing their boundaries, communicating them, defending them, and they do know when a boundary is being crossed, right? That's the difference. And so this person gets mad at me, right, and starts engaging in what feminists would refer to as online abuse, which was a bunch of really harsh statements, bunch of really belligerent. Some of it was, obscene, like just the usual bullshit. And I considered that my situation, is I consider that a win. The person lost the ability to try even to persuade me and just started engaging in bullying. But where it actually stepped over into abuse was the next day. I get on Twitter. This was back when it was Twitter, and I look into my DMs, and there is an image that I will never unsee of a child being abused sexually. And of course, the first thing I did was contact the FBI. I had to look up how to contact and report to the FBI, and I reported the image to Twitter. And for reporting the image to Twitter, Twitter suspended me. Right? So this individual sent a victim of childhood sexual exploitation an image of a child being sexually exploited. That was abuse. I think that would be abuse to send to just about anybody. Nobody should have to see that. We should be able to put a stop to it without everybody having to actually see what it looks like. We don't, just knowing the facts around right and wrong with regard to that, we don't have to look at it. But and then X, Twitter, also engaged in abuse by punishing the individual who reported criminal content for reporting the criminal content. Right? At no point did I cuss at this person. At no point did I engage in any kind of bullying where, when the person said the conversation, they didn't want to talk anymore. I said, that's up to you. You can choose not to talk anymore, but that means I've won the argument. That's it. Nothing was abusive there. I cut through the bullshit, but nothing I said was abusive. Didn't even call a person stupid. Didn't even use the term, the terms that the individual was trying to avoid. I simply cut through the bullshit, right? And that was labeled abuse. So the idea of online abuse to these communist types and anybody that's basically trying to break down your boundaries and tread on them with impunity. They call it abuse when you resist. But yeah, so that's the answer to the question of what is digital abuse. I would consider it abuse to send somebody child porn. That's abuse. Right. But I don't think it was. I don't think I would classify it as abuse that the person who sent me that cussed me out first. Like, they can cuss all they want. I don't fucking care. I don't have any super chats that I know of. I don't have any Rumble rants, so that will be it. Do you guys have any last words on the subject? Everybody's muted.
9. I have 9 comments. No, I have no comments.
9. 9 in German, not 9 in English.
9 in German. You have handled this perfectly, Hannah. I have listened intently, and I have nothing to add because of how good you've handled this. Well done.
Well, I thank you. In that case, I will thank everybody for listening. We will continue on, like I said, with the end of this article and the beginning of the next week. This subject matter pisses me off, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Right? Thanks everybody for participating in the conversation. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen, especially Brian. And good night, all.
Men's right activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.